Hikers, campers, and hunters, what is the creepiest or most unexplained thing you've experienced in the wild? It happened when I was out hunting squirrels and camping with friends in a park in Vermont in early October. All I had was a rifle, as did my two friends. We hiked about 6 miles into what I think was Camel's Hump State Forest. I can't remember. It gets really dark really quick in forests, so we set up camp and ate the squirrels we took that day. I couldn't, for the life of me, find 2 trees to set my tent up near my friends and the campfire, so I set up my tent maybe 500 feet from the camp. We were all tired after hiking and hunting all day and called it a night. Well, here was my first mess up or blessing. I didn't have a flashlight because my friend ran out of batteries, so I gave him mine. The second mess up was how far away I was from the fire. Anyway, I made it to my tent and got into my sleeping bag. It takes me a while to fall asleep, so I was up just lying there. All of a sudden I heard what sounded like trees falling and breaking, loud cracks from branches snapping, and brush moving about, but it was far off. For the next 20 minutes it seemed about the same distance away. I finally fell asleep, but I woke up from noise. This time it was much closer, but still pretty far out. I thought it was critters, maybe a beaver or a fish or cat, even though I heard trees or twigs snapping. However, this time it kept getting closer. Then I heard what sounded like a giant man stomping his feet, and I heard it coming right to my tent. It got extremely loud. I didn't even have my rifle on me. It was in my friend's tent. For the next 30 minutes I heard this thing coming toward me until I swear it was at most 15 yards away from my tent, and at that point I knew it had to be a moose or a bear. I was more worried about it being a moose because it was during the rut and people say they are the most dangerous animal in Vermont. This thing was right next to me in the pitch black, and I couldn't shine a light on it to see what it was, thankfully, because being young and stupid I probably would have. It was probably there for 30 minutes, then something spooked it. I guess it was me, either when it smelled me or when I made a noise. Luckily it didn't attack my tent. We woke up the next day and saw the largest moose prints I had ever seen right near my tent. I swear, since it was during the rut, if I had coughed or sneezed it would have attacked me. That was one time I felt I was close to being killed. Not my story, but it comes from some friends of my dad's from work. One spring during runoff season they were taking a river boat up into a remote drainage for work back in the good old days of paper maps and no radio contact in the back of Beyond. As they were heading out in the morning and a fair ways up, they saw a guy just sitting on the edge of the river. My dad's buddy waved, "Hi," but nothing really struck them as odd at that point. They were way far out, beyond maintained roads, but this is hunter and trapper territory a bit, so it is not unheard of to see people. They never saw a camp or tent or anything, just that guy. On the way out, the guy was sitting in the same spot, did the same little wave, still no camp. They thought it over for a moment and just felt weird about it, so they turned around to go back to talk to him and see what was up. They got back to him and talked to him. He had crossed the Rockies, had lost his pack in a river crossing, and just kept wandering. He had no food. It was early spring, so there was not a lot of food available from the land. He was starving and had sat down to die, and by the time he was seen he thought he was already dead. They had to convince him to come with them in the boat and are still not sure how they ever did it. They got him out to civilization and to help, and he spent a long time in a hospital psychiatric ward being convinced he was still alive. My dad spent more than 20 years in the Marine Corps and used to take camping trips with 2 of his friends in that swamp. It is basically just that. A river that flows through our state with tons of water moccasins and copperheads. Snakes would often fall off the limbs of low-lying trees into their boat. I have no idea why they enjoyed these excursions so much, but after 4 days in the swamp, catching their own food, shooting, and boozing, they always came back stinking like holy hell. On one of their last trips, they pulled the boats up on the shoreline off an access road in a public area. They had grills and trees to string up their hammocks, so they decided they would camp there for the night. My dad, who is the heaviest sleeper I've ever met, and his friends were passed out drunk around 3 a.m. when they were awakened by car lights coming down the access road. At this point, they knew whoever it was probably coming to rob them. All 3 of them were armed to the teeth, and all 3 slept with their pistols. They quietly agreed to stay put in their hammocks until the guy got out of the car and came close, but they were all locked and loaded. The guy got out of the car and had a big knife. Dad racked one into the chamber, his 2 friends drew their weapons on the guy, and my dad said, "You know, it's a really bad idea to bring a knife to a gunfight." The dude backed up, got in his car, and drove away as fast as he could, while the three of them shared another drink and laughed like crazy. To this day, it is one of my favorite stories about my dad and his buddies. Those guys were nuts. My dad and his brother were camping one time in the literal middle of nowhere. Like, no other human being within a 30-mile radius. So everything was normal when they set up a tent and hung out, had a fire, and then they heard an awful scream. It was a rabbit that had probably been killed by a coyote or something, so they grabbed their shotguns just in case one of those dogs ventured too close. Now my dad describes it as a night, in hindsight, that was far too still. No wind, no sounds, nothing. He didn't hear any animals or insects, he says. So they didn't hear the sound of a rabbit scream again, and after another hour or so he and his brother crashed for the night. They then heard the sound again after going inside their tents, and again about 3 hours later. They weren't worried about it at that point and went to sleep. They woke up and took a look, walked around the campsite, but didn't take 10 steps out, as there were 3 or 4 dead rabbits torn up. There were dark red stains everywhere and whatnot. The rabbits weren't eaten. All they did was load a gun, pack up, and leave. I worked in the Idaho backcountry for a summer doing vegetation work and weed spraying. My co-worker and I shared a wall tent 20 miles from any other person and 60 miles from any town along a beautiful creek. We would not see a soul for 10 or more days at a time. Part of our job was reading the journals of those who worked before us to get an idea of past herbicide applications, where the weeds were last year, what kind, and so on. I often referred to the journal of a worker from the year prior, Andrew. According to his journal, he had to work a few days alone because his coworker, Amy, got sick and decided to pack out with some horsemen a few days before the hitch was over. The first day Andrew was alone, he saw a guy hiking who looked kind of ragged and dazed. His notes say the man looked super skinny and was maybe in his 60s. He said his name was Ray and that he was with a group, but Andrew had not seen anybody else, and Ray did not have a backpack. Andrew also knew there was a hunting camp 10 miles away that sometimes had visitors, so they parted ways. The first night alone went well. Andrew enjoyed having time to himself, took a creek bath, and read his book. He had a productive next day working and decided to do a cool hike nearby that Amy would not have done with him, but it took longer than expected. When Andrew got back to camp at dusk, he saw a firelight flickering on the wall tent. He was confused. Had Amy come back? As he got closer, he saw that Ray was sitting there and had started a fire. Andrew asked what was going on, but Ray would not speak and just kept staring at the flames. Andrew got out his radio and called the Forest Service, but it was too late in the evening for anyone to be on. He offered Ray some food, but he refused. It gets pretty cold there at night, so Andrew showed him to Amy's cot since she was gone. They both fell asleep pretty quickly after that. According to Andrew's journal, I woke up in the middle of the night to Ray's screaming. He was on the cot, apparently having a night terror. He would not wake up and was hysterical. He looked like a ghost. Andrew sat outside the rest of the night and dozed off. When he woke up, Ray was gone. He got a hold of the Forest Service and started working around camp, keeping an eye out. Several hours later, a helicopter landed in the valley, and a bunch of police and dogs jumped out. Apparently, Ray had escaped the Idaho State Prison and had wandered the wilderness for a week, looking to get to Montana. I later learned that it was common for escaped prisoners to try to hike up the drainage where we worked to get out of Idaho, and, as you might expect, many of those prisoners were violent offenders with mental disabilities. And of course, Andrew had written this nonchalantly in his journal for me to read at night in that very same wall tent a year later. I was definitely on alert for a few days after that. I was living in Brazil, and a friend and I decided to do a one-night out and back through mountainous rainforest terrain in one of the southern states. We mostly wanted to get some exercise and do a gear shakeout before going on a longer trip in Patagonia. The experience started out really tough. We were doing almost constant climbing, and it was hot. Humidity was near 100% in lush vegetation. Eventually we were pretty much in the clouds and completely drenched from sweat and humidity. It was kind of hellish, soaked to the bone with no chance of drying out. Fortunately, at that altitude it gets below freezing frequently at night, so there were not many insects or animals, only birds. We hiked for probably 8 hours with little progress. It was slow going through tough terrain. By early evening we came to a flat spot, the first we had seen in hours, and decided to make camp as it was starting to pour. I basically made camp in several inches of standing water. I was beat anyway, so I just sat in my tent reading. Around 3 a.m. I woke to a girl singing in the distance. The singing kept coming closer until she was singing right by our tents. She passed by us, and the singing drifted off. She was singing, maybe a lullaby or children's song, about rain in Portuguese, but it sounded very strange. An hour later, I was woken up by the singing in the distance again. She was coming back toward us, singing the same rain song. As she passed us, I could hear a little exasperation in her voice. She continued singing and went back in the direction of the trailhead. Another hour later, I was woken up again by her singing as she came back toward us, except now she was also crying. She continued to cry and sing as she moved past us for the final time. We woke up that morning, looked at each other, said, "What the heck was that?" and then got on our way. It was very eerie at the time, and I don't have an explanation for it. We were in an extremely isolated location, and the trail was definitely only used by recreational hikers, so I really can't say why this woman was out wandering, singing, and crying at 3 a.m. When my brother and I were young, my grandpa started teaching us how to hunt and basic bushcraft. Every time we went back east to visit, we live in California, family is from West Virginia, we'd mess around in the woods for about a week at a time, unless we bagged anything big, in which case we'd clean it and head home to get it in a freezer. On one trip we had been tracking a good-sized boar for about an hour, hoping we'd get to head out early with some bacon. We were moving along a game trail when Grandpa stopped dead, hissed at us to get low and shut the heck up, then after a minute urgently motioned for us to get off the trail. We hustled off the trail about 20 yards and sat stock still. A couple of minutes later something big came along the trail and stopped where we got off. I assumed it was moonshiners or a bear until I heard it start making a weird grunting, snuffling sound with an odd low-pitched hoot now and again. When I looked back at Grandpa, it was the first time I'd ever seen an expression on his face other than laughing, serious, or poker face. He was afraid and not trying to hide it. That's when I knew I was going to die. Grandpa was a Marine, had served in 2 wars, and I'd personally witnessed him chase bears down with a mop handle without batting an eye. This was not an easy man to rattle. We sat back to back for about 10 minutes waiting for whatever it was to leave, and another 20 after to make sure, then Grandpa signaled us to move back toward camp, but not back on the trail. When we got to camp, Grandpa had us break camp, pack everything, and toss it in the truck while he sat on watch with his shotgun. When we drove out we asked him what that was all about. He said, "We're done hunting for this trip. I'll explain more about that bastard when you boys are old enough to be properly scared," and refused to say anything else. We never got it out of him what it was. He and Grandma moved to Phoenix about 5 years later, and he passed a couple of years after that. I'd always meant to ask him but never thought to bring it up when we'd visit. Keeping this as succinct as possible, I once witnessed, for about 5 seconds, what I thought was a large brown bear sprinting upright through a wooded area about 50 yards in front of me. There was some brush obscuring a clear view of the bear, but I saw 90% of it. My dogs were with me, and they didn't make a sound or even give me any hint that they noticed it. They typically went nuts if they sensed a bird way off in the distance. Fast forward a few years, and I finally realized that there are absolutely no brown bears in my area. None. Then it hit me. I may have witnessed a Bigfoot. I was never a Bigfoot believer, but it's the only explanation I now have for what I saw. I also recalled not hearing any branches break or anything of the sort as the creature was sprinting through the woods, which makes it even creepier. I emailed a Bigfoot research organization about all the details of my sighting, and a few weeks later they responded and told me they had received a handful of similar accounts within a 50-mile radius of my sighting in the past decade. I went camping with 2 friends back in 2011. At the time I lived in a rural area pretty much on the border of the Amazon jungle. We set up camp under some mango trees near a deserted road and took the first day to explore our surroundings. Night came and it started to rain. One of my friends had forgotten his tarp back home, and since his tent wasn't waterproof, we had to share mine. We woke up in the night to a calf crying. Sure, there were some properties nearby, and it wasn't uncommon for cattle to roam around. Then we paid attention. Whatever was making that noise was directly above us. It was coming from up in the mango tree. Not exactly what the question asked, but I walk around farmland for exercise. I usually walk the square-mile plot and then repeat if I want more. I started doing it at night in the summer because it was too hot to even exist as a human being. I was halfway through my walk when I saw something that appeared to be 9 feet tall moving toward me from a crossroads. I ran. I ran half a mile back to my house carrying a metal fence post and didn't take another night walk ever again. Not sure what it was. I found a massive, not quite right paw print the day after, leading toward my house. I went camping in southeast Ohio once with my dad and sister, miles from civilization. As it started to get dark, my dad and I started to prepare food for the fire while my sister went to change in her tent. A couple of minutes later she walked over to me and asked, "Were you outside my tent?" I asked her why, and she told me that someone had walked from the direction of the trees to her tent and placed a hand on the wall of the tent. She smacked the hand away, thinking it was me messing with her, but when she came out, no one was there. We told my dad, and he said he did it and left it at that. The problem was I knew it was not him because I was with him the whole time. Later that night I asked him why he lied, and he told me it was too late to go home, so there was no sense in scaring my sister when there was nothing to do about it. I stayed in my sister's tent that night with a knife in hand and did not sleep. We stayed for another night without incident, but I could not get my mind off the fact that we were not alone. I have this nifty little hammock tent thingy that I camp in. It's a canvas hammock with a weatherproof shell you can't see out of, and one time one of the flaps on my hammock just started going crazy like a cat pawing at a door it wants out of. I played it off as the wind, but then realized there's no wind. So I tried to close my eyes, and it happened again 2 minutes later. This time I thought to myself, it's probably a raccoon, and I smacked the side of my tent, and then all of a sudden I heard some really heavy footsteps running away after I smacked my tent. That was one of the closest times I almost lost it, so I just kept lying there for about an hour before coming to the conclusion that whatever was bugging me was gone. I fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up and looked around, I saw some weird-looking footprints, like mini bear tracks would be the closest I can think of, but the weird part is they were only around my hammock and there were no tracks leading up to my tent, but there were tracks leading away. I still don't know what that was, but I only stayed at that site for one night. I'd like to know if anyone else has had similar experiences with cryptids. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar with wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear. A bear can't move the way it did, and it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on two legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural doing so. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky back then, but still somewhat knowledgeable about the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was that if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. During the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, until this incident. It happened somewhere between 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. My cousin and I were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camouflage. He was not. I retreated onto the all-terrain vehicle trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters in, to about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me, when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds. But it wasn't normal. This wolf was on two legs, crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that, "We have to go," and the next thing I knew, he was sprinting. I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours. It charged us and sounded right on our heels, barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason it let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and where it should have had front paws, it appeared to have large, clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears mostly waddle on two legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. I went camping for a weekend with my best friend and her dad when we were about 15 or so. On the last night there, I woke up in the middle of the night. It must have been 3 a.m. or later. I didn't check the time because there was someone walking. You could hear the soft, crunchy rustle of pine needles. It had the pace and sound of a large person. The footsteps walked straight to the tent my best friend and I were in and just stopped. I couldn't see a shadow or silhouette, but I wasn't sure if that was because the moonlight was at a different angle. My best friend had heard it too, and she was staring at me. We never heard the footsteps leave. We would have heard them because we stayed awake until the sun came up. No footsteps walking away and no shadow. We didn't get out until we heard her dad wake up and start setting up the campfire again. Then we ran out and started screaming and crying. We both confirmed with each other what we heard and saw. She looked for a shadow too, but there was nothing. Her dad looked around the entire campsite and didn't find a single thing out of place. It was very weird. The freakiest thing was thinking that something could have stood outside the tent, observing us somehow. It definitely felt like it knew we knew it was there, if there was anything at all. It was during an archaeology field school in Utah. Everyone returned to their tents to sleep, but a couple of friends and I decided to sit up for a while longer and enjoy the cool night air in the canyon and chat a little more. Greg was the first to notice it. He went quiet and told us to shush and listen. It took about half a minute before all three of us could hear it. It was some sort of chanting, a song. It got a little louder, like the people singing were moving closer, but there was no one else in the canyon but us. We listened, and the chanting kept going for what seemed like a few minutes before it died down and stopped. We figured it had to have been some group somewhere in the canyon doing some ritual. We were not scared, more like contented and peaceful. It felt, I dunno, right in some way. The next morning, during breakfast, we mentioned this incident to our professor and said we thought he had told us we would be alone in the canyon. He said, "We are alone," and then, with a smile, said he knew the song we heard. He had heard it once before. He asked the tribal shaman about it, and our professor was able to repeat the chant to the shaman. The shaman told him it was the song of the air, sung by the gods when they are pleased with someone's presence. The professor told us it meant we were welcomed by the gods of the canyon, that we were warriors protecting the tribe. I walked up on a fugitive from the law while doing nighttime land navigation tests when I was in the military. The short version is that we passed a lot of law enforcement on our way out to the land navigation course, and as we got to the staging area, the radio news came on about a manhunt in the area. Some guy had been chased across something like 4 states, and they had chased him into the woods here. The police presence was a good few miles from the navigation course, so we kept on. I got my coordinates and headed out for the daytime part, got my nighttime coordinates, and headed back into the woods to wait for dark to continue moving. At this phase of training, it was common for the instructors to come mess with you while you were navigating to simulate a combat environment. They would throw gas at you or do stuff like that so you had to escape and evade. Anyway, I was coming up to my last point, and there was a field between me and it. So I stopped near the tree line and watched for a moment, and I could see something moving across the field. I could not tell what it was, but it was big. My gut reaction was that it was the instructors coming to mess with me, so I moved back in and tried to let them pass, but they kept moving closer. I decided I was going to get the drop on them and attack first. I had a rubber rifle, and the standard operating procedure to engage with this thing was to yell bang bang, for notional combat like that. As this thing got close, I jumped up and yelled Marines, bang bang, and right as I did that, this silhouette shouted oh crap, and ran off. It did not sound like the instructors. I kind of panicked for a minute, found a new hiding spot in the tree line, and waited for a while to make sure whoever that was did not come back. After about 45 minutes or so, I decided to get it over with, booked it across the field, got my last point, and rushed back to the staging area. The instructors were both hanging out and asked what all the yelling was about. I told them what happened, and they decided to call it a night. The next morning, the news was all over that authorities had caught the guy about 2 miles from where I had run across him. My old man was an avid outdoorsman in the Colorado Rockies in the late 1980s. He'd go on week-long treks with his buds. One summer they'd been out for a few days in Pike National Forest. They set up camp in a ravine they thought was safe. That night my dad unzipped the tent to take a leak in the dark, and outside stood a pair of pale, bare feet. My dad screamed and zipped up the tent. Everyone else woke up and asked what was wrong. My dad said someone was barefoot out there. They went out and flashed their lights for a bit and hollered. My dad swore he saw what he saw and described the feet in detail. They were old, blotchy feet. One even had a lump on the ankle. Tony, his bud, asked which foot, left or right. My dad said it was the right. Then Tony said they needed to move their camp immediately. My dad asked why. Tony said they did not have time. They went along with it, packed up, and moved to the top of the hill. The next morning they woke up to find a flash flood had torn through the ravine during the night. It would surely have killed them. Tony's grandfather had died a month earlier, and one of the last things he told him was that he would always watch over him. The feet my dad described reminded Tony of his grandfather's feet. My dad is highly religious. Supernatural or not, someone's paranoid vision saved their lives that night.